G'day guys, and today we're going to be talking about Muslim participation in the Australian workforce and perhaps some of the reasons why it is as it is. Now, this issue has recently been brought back into the limelight by the maiden speech of Senator Fraser Anning, who had the following to say.
I believe that the reason for ending all further Muslim immigration are both compelling and self-evident. The record of Muslims who have already come to this country in terms of rates of crime, welfare dependency and terrorism are the worst of any migrant and vastly exceed any other immigrant group. The majority of Muslims in Australia of working age do not work and live on welfare.
So that last claim got my attention, because a big fear of mine is foreigners coming to Australia and leeching off my future productivity. So, I did a little research, and in between about 500,000 articles calling him a racist for including the words final solution in his speech, I found a couple of fact checkers. So, let's have a look at the ABC News fact check. The verdict. Senator Anning's claim is half-baked. The majority of working age Muslims, that is more than half the age of Muslims aged 15 to 64, are not working. The exact figure is 51.3%. So in that regard, Senator Anning is totally right. But whether these Muslims are also living on welfare payments cannot be established because the government does not collect information on religion in social security statistics. The ABS does not collect this data either. And we all know that's just them saying, we're scared of being called racist, even though Islam isn't a race. So looking at this, it kind of looks like the ABC just affirms that Anning's right. 51.3% of Muslims are not in the workforce. Oh no, but look, in May he said that 56% of Muslims weren't in the labour force. Oh my god, what a bigot! Well, the truth is, as the ABC article goes on to say, is that 42% of Muslims aren't in the labour force, which is close to double the national average of 24. Now, why did he report this false statistic? Well, clearly he was either misinformed, since he was running off data from 2015, which means this problem is getting worse or increasing, or he was copying the Trump strategy. Now, the Trump strategy basically goes a little bit like this. You make a statement that's slightly incorrect, you get dogpiled for being incorrect, and either the correct stats are reported in articles affirming your claim is false, or people get curious and look up the stats themselves. Congratulations, your ideological opponents have just published the data you wanted everyone to see. Free publicity, essentially. Now, why do I think this is the case? Well, he's already copied another one of Trump's strategies of rocking the boat by coming out with off-the-wall statements in his maiden speech that no mainstream Liberal, Labour, National, whatever, no mainstream politician would dare say. Indeed, his team has already confirmed his maiden speech was meant to be provocative. This gets him loads of free publicity, which is important for Anning because he's basically a political no-one. No one had heard of him before his maiden speech. I'm fairly sure just 19 people voted to get him into the Senate, which is pretty funny. But back to the topic at hand. Here we have workforce participation rate by religion. This comes from the ABS census data from 2016. Now, if we have a look at it, the national average for Australia sits around 70 to 75%, and we have Islam right at the bottom, or right at the top, with about slightly less than 60% workforce participation rate. Now, why is this? Well, it's mostly due to the workforce participation rate gap within Islam between men and women. I wonder if the feminists would like to talk about this. Well, I don't know, maybe they'd like to talk about Islam in general. But, nah, I guess not. Anyway, let's break this data up by gender. The general trend one might notice straight away is the overall lower female workforce participation rate. This is probably down to the fact that women get pregnant and you can't work when you're pregnant, or at least you shouldn't. If we look down the bottom at the Australian working age population, we can see a drop from about 80% to about 70%, so a 10% gap between men and women there. All the other religions, including secular beliefs, tend to have slightly larger gaps, looking between about 10 and 20%. But then we get to Islam. It should be noted that the Islamic male workforce participation rate is about 70, which is higher than their average, which is about slightly lower than 60. This immediately indicates there must be some kind of gap between men and women in order for the average to be dragged from about 70 to about 60. Now, bottom graph. Female workforce participation rate among Islamic women drops to about slightly higher than 41%, which is a gap of about 30%, give or take my error in looking at this graph. So that's about roughly a third more than Buddhism and other religions and Hinduism. But in the case of Christianity, secular beliefs, and the Australian working age population, it's almost 3 times as much, give or take. Judaism, of course, being the outlier, which only helps to affirm stereotypes. So why? Why the discrepancy in workforce participation rate? It's all down to cultural and religious reasons, I believe. So first up, we have religious law. Any jobs the woman has must be compliant with Sharia law. So no stripping, no singing, no drinking, no gambling. This restricts, obviously, certain kinds of jobs. Second up, the religious dress code must be kept, so hijab, burqa, whatever. This also restricts you from certain kind of jobs. Number 3, a unmarried woman requires permission from her father to go and get a job, and a married woman requires permission from her husband. This ties in probably to the whole women are someone's property sort of thing. So that's a bit of a problem. So even if you can work, and even if you can get a job that's compliant with Sharia law, and you can dress in your burqa, and that's fine, you still need permission. And lastly, we have male-female clashes. Women should not communicate with men, and women should not be alone with men. This could be a little bit of a problem if you're, say, working an extended night shift and you have to work with just one other dude in your security job or whatever. That's a no-go. Communicating with men, you need to work in an office and talk to your male co-worker, that's a no-go. So these are some reasons why we might be seeing lower workforce participation rate. There's only certain types of jobs that Islamic women are able and allowed to get, essentially. Now, there's 2 reasons why this may be an issue for Australia. The first is economical and, I guess, moral. Because if you have a lower workforce participation rate, this means you essentially have more people eligible for welfare, which means the government has to take money off private citizens, which is the initiation of force and theft, essentially. That's no good. It can also be a cultural issue because, say for example, you're an Islamic woman. You don't want to work, you want to stay at home and raise your family. That's fine, cool, whatever, that's totally voluntary. But if you do want to work and you can't get permission, or you need to wear your burqa and you can't do that in your job, that becomes a little bit of an issue. We have an oppressive religion in Australia that the government does not talk down. In fact, it openly embraces it with its multicultural statement. I don't think the Australian government should be encouraging this sort of behaviour by being silent. Religious oppression of women in Australia should not exist. We live in a Western country, we live in a first world country, we live in a semi-free country that's abandoned this sort of thing. So yeah, them's the facts and figures. The Islamic community is dragging the train on workforce participation rate. Are they all on welfare? It's impossible to determine for sure. The ABS doesn't collect that kind of data because they're a bunch of cowards. But we can intuit. Again, if you have a lower workforce participation rate, you have a higher percentage of people eligible for welfare. And if you're not working, you're not bringing in money, you might need that sort of thing. And it also lives up to the stereotype and some of the on-the-ground reporting people have done. Now, female workforce participation rate. As long as it's voluntary, who cares? If you want to stay at home, someone's got to raise the kids, But if there's any kind of social, religious, cultural pressure, that's no good. Of course, I believe Islamic women should be as free as any other women in Australia. I don't see why the Australian government should tolerate any kind of anti-female practice. Alright, that's about all. Thanks for sticking around and have a good one.